Welcome to Mill History Talk, the podcast where we explore the past to better understand the profession of arms today. We dive into the campaigns, conflicts, issues, and commanders that have shaped military thinking across centuries, and why it all still matters. Whether you're an officer in training, a seasoned professional, a student of strategy, or simply curious about how history informs modern warfare, this space is for you. Our mission is simple: to foster insight, reflection, and critical thinking primarily through the lens of military history. Before we begin, a quick note. The views expressed in this podcast are of the podcast writers, hosts, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency or organization. So, whether you're listening in a barracks, a lecture hall, at the gym, or in your car on the way to work, welcome. We're glad you're here. Hey everyone, I'm Hope, your friendly, slightly nerdy guide through the wild drama that is world military history. Today we are posting our 34th episode, and before we begin, we'd like to share with you that our audience is growing, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our take on military history. If you like what we're doing here at Mill History Talk, please share the link with your friends. Now, on to the early 20th century. Today's episode? Picture a samurai epic colliding with an industrial age training montage. We're talking about how Japan went from katana and top knots to battleships and conscription, faster than you can say Meiji Restoration. So grab your armor, or your Tom Cruise wig, because this is the real story behind The Last Samurai, except with fewer slow-motion sunsets and way more logistics.
And far more accurate muskets. When Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in Edo Bay in 1853, Japan's centuries-old isolation ended overnight. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, society had been strictly feudal: daimyo lords, samurai retainers, and an economy that ran on rice stipends rather than factories. Perry's steam fleet made one thing painfully clear: Japan's swords couldn't stand up to Western firepower.
Think of it as that moment in Shogun when everyone realizes the Portuguese have guns. But now, multiply that by 300 years of technological gap. So by 1868, Japan faces a choice: modernize or get colonized. Cue the young Emperor Meiji and his reformist squad from the southwestern domains. Their rallying cry? Fukoku Kyohei, rich country, strong army. Translation? Build wealth, build weapons, avoid becoming someone's colony.
Those leaders, especially men from Satsuma and Choshu, abolished the old feudal domains and centralized the military under the emperor. The new Meiji government created the War and Navy Ministries and, in 1873, instituted universal conscription. Every able-bodied male owed 3 years of active service and 4 in the reserves. That law ended the samurai monopoly on warfare, turning Japan's military from a hereditary caste into a national institution.
And you can imagine how well that went over with the samurai. Picture Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai shaking his head dramatically as conscripted farmers show up with rifles. They have no honor. Yeah, well, they did have repeating rifles, which helped. The transition was messy. In 1877, the disgruntled samurai launched the Satsuma Rebellion under Saigo Takamori, the real-life inspiration for half the scenes in The Last Samurai. But spoiler, the movie left out the ending where the imperial army, made mostly of those new conscripts, crushed the samurai with modern artillery.
That victory proved Japan's new national army could defeat its own feudal elite. It was a symbolic death of the old order. Loyalty shifted from clan to emperor, from sword to state. Afterward, modernization accelerated. The government founded military academies and imported Western advisors. Initially, Japan looked to France, the pre-Prussian model of style and élan. But after Prussia's victory in 1871, Japanese reformers reoriented toward the German system, valuing discipline and staff organization over flair.
So basically, Japan went from, let's look chic like the French, to, let's get terrifyingly efficient like the Prussians. Enter Major Jakob Meckel, the Prussian officer who arrived in 1885 to whip Japan's army into shape. If The Last Samurai had a sequel called The First Prussian, it'd be about this guy, teaching wargaming and staff drills instead of Bushido philosophy.
Meckel reorganized the army into divisions and created the Imperial General Staff, which reported directly to the emperor. This gave Japan's army professional autonomy, similar to Prussia's, making it both highly efficient and, later, politically independent. He also promoted technical training in engineering and artillery, disciplines that would become critical in Japan's later wars.
And meanwhile, while all these guys are learning how to march in perfect German synchronization, the government decides the military also needs a moral code. Cue the Imperial Rescript to Soldiers and Sailors in 1882. It basically said, "Obey the emperor, don't be flashy, don't complain, and maybe die for your country if needed." Imagine an HR orientation video narrated by a divine emperor, equal parts Confucian ethics and nationalism. Every recruit memorized it. It was the original terms of service, except you really couldn't click decline.
The rescript created a fusion of modern military professionalism with traditional Japanese spirituality. Soldiers saw service not as employment, but as a sacred duty. That belief, loyalty to the emperor above all, would define Japan's armed forces well into the 20th century.
And speaking of modernization, the Navy was getting its own glow-up. If the Army had its Prussian makeover, the Navy went full Royal Navy cosplay. Britain sent a naval mission under Lieutenant Commander Archibald Douglas in 1873, and suddenly the Japanese are learning navigation, gunnery, and, let's be honest, how to look cool in double-breasted uniforms. By the 1890s, they're buying British-built cruisers and even building their own at Yokosuka and Kure. It's like Japan binge-watched the British Empire and decided, we'll take one of those, thanks.
They also adopted British doctrine, emphasis on gunnery accuracy, ship speed, and command of the sea. English became the Navy's instructional language. At the same time, industrial infrastructure expanded, arsenals, shipyards, steelworks, all under government direction. The goal wasn't just to buy modern weapons, but to build them domestically. The first Japanese-made Murata rifle appeared in 1880, and by 1900, Japan was producing warships capable of rivaling Europe's smaller powers.
So in one generation, Japan pulled a total systems upgrade. Feudal domains gone, conscription in place, Western advisors on speed dial, and a military that suddenly looked ready to co-star in every future FX war drama. I mean, if Shogun Season 2 ever jumps ahead to the Meiji era, they're going to need a budget for all the cannons, uniforms, and maybe a cameo from Tom Cruise just wandering through saying, "I trained those guys."
By 1900, the Imperial Army and Navy stood as the most modern forces in Asia, organized like Europeans, industrially supported at home, and unified by emperor-centered nationalism. And that transformation was about to be tested, not in theory, but in battle.
Oh, and here's where it gets good. Because what's the point of building an all-new military if you don't, use it? Japan's first big flex came against China in 1894, and spoiler alert, it was a mic drop moment on the world stage. But hold that thought, because once the shooting starts, everything we've talked about, the modernization, the training, the ideology, will collide with reality. Now it's 1894, and Japan's ready to test drive this new power in the First Sino-Japanese War. The prize? Control of Korea, a small peninsula that's suddenly become the hottest real estate in East Asia. The samurai are out, the conscripts are in, and somewhere Tom Cruise is quietly weeping into his kabuto helmet.
For centuries, Korea had been under Chinese influence. But Japan's new leaders viewed it as their strategic shield. If another great power took Korea, Japan's home islands would be vulnerable. So when rebellion broke out there, both China and Japan sent troops. The Japanese refused to withdraw after the rebellion ended, and suddenly, war broke out.
And this wasn't some little skirmish. This was Japan's "we're not a feudal country anymore" moment. On land, the imperial army absolutely dismantled the Qing forces, Songhuan, Pyongyang, Yalu River. Each battle showing just how far Japan's training and discipline had come. It's like watching a samurai movie and realizing the guy with the sword is now backed by a field artillery corps and a staff college diploma.
Meanwhile, the Navy's performance was equally impressive. At the Battle of the Yalu River, Admiral Ito Tsukiyuki's fleet, made up of modern cruisers, destroyed China's Beiyang fleet. The Chinese had two massive ironclads, but the Japanese gunnery and maneuvering were vastly superior. It was a textbook display of British-style tactics combined with Japanese precision.
And when Japan captured Port Arthur in November 1894, the world went, "Wait, what?" Because an Asian army had just beaten one of the great old empires of the East, and they did it with Western efficiency and Japanese tenacity. I mean, it's the moment where shogun samurai descendants finally learned how to use torpedoes.
The Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895 gave Japan Taiwan, the Pescadores, and recognition of Korea's independence. But before they could even celebrate, the European powers intervened. Russia, France, and Germany forced Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula, claiming to preserve peace. In reality, they just didn't like the idea of an Asian country upsetting the imperial order.
Ah, yes, the triple intervention, aka, "Congratulations on your win, now give back your trophy." That one really stung. It was Japan's never-again moment. They realized if they wanted respect on the global stage, they needed an even bigger army and navy, one so strong, no one could push them around.
That humiliation triggered a new wave of expansion. The indemnity payments from China were used to fund new battleships, arsenals, and fortifications. Between 1895 and 1903, Japan ordered 6 first-class battleships and more than 20 cruisers, most from British shipyards. At the same time, the army expanded to 12 divisions, refining its general staff planning along German lines. Japan wasn't just modernizing anymore. It was arming for global parity.
Which brings us to 1904, the Russo-Japanese War. This is the one where every history professor gets excited and every Netflix producer smells a limited series. Russia's moving into Manchuria. Japan's like, "Excuse me, Korea is ours," and diplomacy collapses faster than a tea ceremony at a bar fight. So what does Japan do? Pulls a prequel to Pearl Harbor, launches a surprise torpedo attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. Boom. Half the Russian ships disabled before they even wake up.
It was an audacious opening move, and it worked. Japan seized control of the seas. Then, in rapid succession, Japanese troops landed in Korea, crossed the Yalu River, and advanced deep into Manchuria. The fighting was brutal. Modern rifles, machine guns, and heavy artillery. The siege of Port Arthur alone became a nightmare of trenches, barbed wire, and high-explosive shells. Japanese troops launched repeated assaults against fortified Russian positions, suffering massive losses.
The siege was like the last samurai finale, if the samurai had artillery, telegraphs, and a logistics corps. It was epic, but horrifying. At one point, an entire Japanese regiment lost more than 1,600 of 1,800 men. And yet, they kept attacking until they took 203-meter hill. From there, their big guns could shell the Russian fleet trapped in the harbor below. One by one, the ships sank. That's persistence and terrifying modern warfare.
When Port Arthur finally fell in January 1905, it signaled the end of Russia's Pacific ambitions. But the war wasn't over. The decisive battle would be fought at sea, the Battle of Tsushima. Admiral Togo Heihachiro's fleet intercepted Russia's Baltic fleet, which had sailed 80,000 miles from Europe. The Russians were exhausted, undersupplied, and poorly trained. Togo executed his famous crossing the T maneuver, bringing concentrated fire on the Russian line.
It's the naval version of I have the high ground. And wow, did it work. Out of 38 Russian ships, 21 sunk, 7 captured. Japan lost 3 torpedo boats. That's it. Admiral Togo became a national hero. Britain even sent Emperor Meiji a lock of Admiral Nelson's hair, which is such a weirdly specific gift. Like, congrats on your total naval domination. Here's some 19th century DNA.
The Treaty of Portsmouth ended the war. Japan gained control of Korea, southern Sakhalin, and the lease of Port Arthur. For the first time, an Asian nation had defeated a European power in modern industrial war. The victory was more than symbolic. It demonstrated that Japan's Meiji-era institutions, technology, and discipline had created a military equal to any in the world.
And it wasn't just Japan watching. Across Asia, people under colonial rule looked at this and thought, wait, we can do that? The myth of European invincibility shattered overnight. But inside Japan, it also planted something dangerous, a belief that they were destined to lead Asia, militarily and politically. The same army that rose from samurai roots would one day march across the Pacific with imperial ambitions.
True. The Russo-Japanese War wasn't just a military success. It was the birth of a great power. But it also marked the beginning of a mindset that Japan's destiny was expansion through strength. The Meiji reforms had achieved their goal, but perhaps too well.
So yeah, it's a little poetic. The same modernization that saved Japan from colonization also set it on a collision course with the world 3 decades later. But hey, let's not jump ahead too fast. Because the real legacy of these wars wasn't just victory. It was how they previewed the next one. Machine guns, trenches, total mobilization. It all looked a little too familiar when the world went to war again in 1914.
Precisely. The Meiji Army and Navy were the blueprint for industrial warfare, and the proof that modernization could transform not just a nation, but the entire balance of global power.
And with that, we've reached the moment where Japan's transformation from samurai stronghold to superpower is complete. In less than 40 years, they'd gone from shogun to steamships, from bushido to battleships. It's the kind of evolution even Tom Cruise couldn't montage fast enough.
Next time, we'll dive into how the phenomenon of industrial war manifests again, this time in Europe, in what some would call the war to end all wars, World War I.
If you want to read a little more detail on the Meiji Restoration and the rise of the Imperial Japanese military, see the article we've posted in our Mill History Talk Substack. The link is posted in the notes. Until next time, I'm Hope.
And I'm Brian.
And this has been Mill History Talk. Remember, history isn't dusty. It's drama, strategy, and the occasional Hollywood cameo. Catch you next time.